Wake up and let's go to the Mindless Morning Show.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Mindless Morning Show. Currently, Dakota is on vacation. He is at Mindless Mexico and enjoying his time. And unfortunately, I'm still home. But I have an amazing opportunity because months and months ago, February, was the first time I got a chance to speak to this wonderful individual and meet him, and even more so as our relationship has blossomed into so many things. Howard Bloom, how are you doing?
I apparently am doing well, Josh. It's always hard to tell.
I get that. I mean, you know, if you're still breathing, I think it's all good. So, yeah, so in February we met. I had just finished watching the documentary too, The Grand Unified Theory of Howard Bloom, and amazing documentary. If you guys haven't watched it, watch it. But I was just completely enthralled and immediately started idolizing you, Howard. And I couldn't believe it when I got the chance to interview you. And then a week after that interview, I'm sitting on a meeting talking about how we can bring the Howard Bloom Institute to life that was talked about in the documentary, because it wasn't even a thing yet. So that was really, really cool to be a part of it. And it's been exponentially amazing in the things that I get to witness and the meetings I get to sit in on. So it's really cool. And I thank you for that. But more importantly, let's talk a little bit about the Howard Bloom Institute, HBI, as we'll refer to it.
Well, it all got started when I was 10 years old. Sounds ridiculous, right? But when I was 10 years old, I was a lost child in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. Other kids that would literally move the baseball diamond to another field if they saw me coming and suspected their parents would pressure them into picking me for a team. That's how much they didn't want to play with me. They did like to play with me when it meant seizing my hat and throwing it back and forth between them and humiliating me, or throwing my book bag into a lawn full of dog shit. I was perfectly fine as a target, but they had no room for me in their lives. So my parents, for I don't know what reason, had no interest in me either. And one day I was sitting in my family's big living room and a book appeared in my lap. And you know how you know the location of every book your parents own, because the locations have stayed the same ever since you came to consciousness at the age of 2 or 3. Well, this is a book that never had a place on my parents' shelves. I don't know where it came from. And I opened it and it said, the first 2 laws of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the example of Galileo, and it misrepresented Galileo's history, unfortunately. It told the story as if Galileo was willing to go to the stake to defend his truth. That's not true. It would take me 30 years to find out. Galileo actually cut a deal with the Pope, abjured all of his knowledge, and lived under house arrest for the next roughly 9 years. But I needed the heroic version of the story, not the real version. And rule number 1 was the truth at any price, including the price of your life, which is the rule of courage. Rule number 2 was look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. And it gave the example of Anton von Leeuwenhoek, the guy who invented the microscope and discovered that we share a world and always have, with a whole microscopic zoo of creatures, including the sperm from our own bodies. And but basically this meant, and all of a sudden I had a crew to hang out with. I could hang out with people like von Leeuwenhoek and Galileo, and they would never say no to me. They would never try to turn their backs and move the field someplace where I couldn't find them. Why? Because they were dead. They could not say no. So this became my posse. These 2 rules became the fundamental core beliefs of my life. But it meant that 2 guys had reached out across a distance of 350 miles and saved my ass, Josh. they had saved me. So if I have any obligation, and I do, it's to do for others what they did for me. And it's to reach out across the next 350 years and save the next lost child, whether it's a male, a female, it doesn't matter. Save whoever is lost and give them a sense of orientation and meaning in their lives. So that's been my task, one of my tasks ever since. And so that means that my tiny little body of knowledge, my 7 books, and I'm working on my 8th book right now, and everything else that I've done, I'm leaving behind as a time capsule for a kid 350 years down the line. But how in the world am I going to reach a kid 350 years down the line? I mean, I'm just one of 7 billion humans on this planet. My odds against building a pillar so high that I can reach across time are infinitesimal, impossibly small. So when I died, I wanted to leave my building, which is the only asset that I own, the place I live, to form a Howard Bloom Institute. And they featured that. The filmmaker, Charlie Hoxie, who's won 3 Grammys, who was making the grand unified theory of Howard Bloom, featured that in his film. He showed me meeting Amir for the first and only time, the guy I was going to leave this to, in order to finish the will that would leave this to Amir to start Howard Bloom Institute. Well, when the film came out, it's won 2 festival prizes, and it probably would have won more, except COVID then came along and shut down the festival circuit. But people saw the movie and said, I want to be a part of the Howard Bloom Institute. And at first I said, well, there is no Howard Bloom Institute yet. And then it occurred to me that there were now a small batch of people who wanted to be part of the Howard Bloom Institute. And if I put them together in one virtual room somewhere, all of a sudden there would be a Howard Bloom Institute. So I put them together, and the Howard Bloom Institute has been up and running ever since, with that goal of reaching the next kid 350 years down the line, building a pedestal high enough so that I can reach those kids.
And what would you say to those kids hundreds of years from now that looks back on this time while trying to figure out their own existence?
Well, first of all, the truth at any price, including the price of your life. If you are born an outsider, I was born an outsider for reasons beyond my knowledge. If you are born an outsider, you have a valuable role to play in society. Because if you're the outsider, you're the person who can see the big picture that other people miss because their noses are so pressed against the pain of their daily reality. And that gives you an obligation actually bigger than any of those who fit in, because you are the watchman, you are the seer, you are the person who can see into the future, you are the person who can warn against upcoming dangers and help spotlight incoming opportunities. And if you are born a contrarian, then by all means embrace it. In my case, one day I was at a rock concert. Science continued to be my basic field, but I wanted to do a field expedition into the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. So even though I knew nothing about popular culture, I ended up in popular culture, and I founded the biggest PR firm in the music industry. And I worked with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, people like that, Run DMC. I worked with entire movements, taking country and Western music global, establishing this new music that was the pride flag of a community that had been oppressed, the gay community that was disco, working with ZZ Top to validate Texas culture to the world, little things like that. So one day I was at a concert at a place the size of Madison Square Garden, roughly 12 to 15,000 seats. And I went to the front of the audience to feel what they were feeling. And they were all clapping. So I clapped too. We were all standing and clapping. And then I noticed something strange. When everybody else's hands were going like this, my hands were going like this. And when everybody else's hands were going like this, my hands were going like this. In other words, whatever that phrase means about the striding to a different drummer, hearing a different drummer, that was it. It was alive inside of me. I had never quite seen it this starkly before. So if you are one of us oddballs, you have a privileged position. You may feel that you are an outcast in a cold and lonely reality with nobody around you. But in reality, you have the opportunity to speak to a larger group of people than any of those people who are prisoners of convention. So that's one of the things. And if you are a contrarian and you see things the opposite of the ways other people see them, you have a particularly valuable role to play. And the other basic message is that this is a cosmos in search of her potential. This is a cosmos that has been constantly, for 13.73 billion years, feeling out her next steps. And her next steps periodically turn out to be what I call supersized surprises, what people in the sciences and philosophy call emergent properties. You know, you take 3 quarks, and according to Aristotle, all you have to do is know the laws of quarks, and you'll understand everything you need to understand. Well, let these 3 quarks come together, which they will because they are profoundly social. They cannot exist without ganging up. Allow these 3 quarks to gang up. And according to Aristotle, what will you get? 3 times as much quarkness, right? That's not what you get at all. You get these astonishing new forms of reality called a proton and a neutron, which you could not predict by knowing the laws of quarks, not on your life. So these are the things that in science we call emergent properties. In Bloomism, we call supersized surprises. And the universe is constantly gestating and birthing new supersized surprises. And so the cosmos is a search engine, constantly sending out feelers to feel out her next possibility. She's like, remember when you lost a contact lens once upon a time on a shag rug, and you spread out your fingers and ran your fingers through the rug to find the contact lens? Well, the universe is constantly spreading out feelers, fingers, antennae into the possible future and the impossible future, because these supersized surprises seem impossible. And you and I are among the fingertips that the universe is spreading out. You and I are probes and antennae for the universe. And if you are an insider, the group you're a part of is a probe for the universe seeking out her next possibilities. And if you're an outsider, you are an even more substantial probe, because you are able to probe beyond the envelope of the group. And the group sorely needs that, whether it recognizes that or not. So that's a little bit of the message. I mean, in 7 books, there are a lot of ideas. And, you know, I write these things for that kid 350 years down the line. But I've been clinically depressed most of my life, for about 50 out of my 78 years on this planet, maybe a little bit more. And that means you're depressed every waking second of the day. So when I started getting emails, God knows when, probably 15 or 20 years ago, from people saying, I read your book and it saved my life. I started to collect those things in a single file so that if I was ever depressed, you know, you wake up and you feel like you're of no value to anybody on this planet, and suicide seems like a logical move. So for days like those, I would have this file to look at. I forgot a couple of things, Josh. When you're really depressed, you don't have the motivation or energy to open a file like that. But the file grew and grew and grew. It's now, I think, about 650 pages long. So in my effort to save kids 350 years down the line, I've inadvertently, not so inadvertently, actually, I've saved a lot of people. And these days I'm getting letters, not just from 16-year-olds saying that life didn't make any sense to me at all, and I was thinking of doing away with myself, and then I read your book. I'm now getting emails from people who say, I read your book 30 years ago. And, or I read your book, it's not 30 years ago. I read your book when I was 15, and now I'm 30. And your book has guided my life for half of my life. Or in the case of one person who I'm in touch with on Zoom and is, I think, soon going to be a part of the Howard Bloom Institute, he said, look, you and I started corresponding 20 years ago. I'm now 40 years old. you have influenced me for 40 years. Whenever I have a meeting and come out with a pronouncement, it tends to be something you have said. So that's tremendously gratifying for a person who nobody else ever wanted to have anything to do with. So that's the egotistical, narcissistic vision of the Howard Bloom Institute. But the goal, I used to lecture a friend. I used to say to him, every day you wake up is the first day of the most important 20 years of your life. Meaning every day you wake up, every day you manage to be living and breathing and conscious is the first day of a massive project and the most important one you've ever undertaken. And then one day I looked up his age and I discovered he was 78 years old at that point. I'm 78 years old now. His name was Buzz Aldrin. And I was trying to explain to him, one day we were in I got on a plane to go to Washington, D.C. I was being flown down there by the Center for Strategic and International Studies to talk about harvesting solar power in space and sending it to Earth. So they were flying me first class for God knows what reason. And, you in the waiting room at an airport, you can't help it if you're male. You scan all of the women, and I'm sure if you're homosexual, you scan all the men, looking for the most attractive one, and you always hope that you'll be seated next to the most attractive one, but you never are. Well, on this particular occasion, I was seated next to the most attractive woman in the waiting room. And I started to start a conversation, and I heard this voice behind me saying, "Howard, is that you?" And it was Buzz Aldrin. So we were separated by whatever it's called, the plane seating plan. And then when we got off, he waited for me and I waited for him. And we took that long, interminable, day-long walk to the luggage area together. And I was lecturing him on, it's our job to make history. Why is it our job to make history? Because you and I are insecure little people. We do wake up often thinking we're of no value to anybody on the planet. We're super conscious of any little zit that we have, any little discoloration. And yet it's people like us who wake up feeling useless to the world with zits that embarrass them terribly, who end up changing the course of history. Alexander the Great was such an insecure person that at one point he went up to a mountaintop and he cried, he wept because he felt he had no more worlds to conquer. Well, that was ridiculous. He had tried to conquer India, he had failed. There was China beyond India. There were tons of worlds to conquer, but he was weak like all of us and had to summon his strength to seem strong to those around him, because that's the only kind of strength we have, is gathering up our weaknesses and binding them together with perseverance. And I showed him tried to show him how Winston Churchill helped save Western civilization from the Nazis. And here was Winston Churchill, a guy who was depressed all the time. His wife called it his black dog, his depression, because he would wake up and there would be sleeping on his ankles, depression. And yet, he was overweight, he was an alcoholic, he was a chronic smoker, and he saved fucking Western civilization. So if the only people who have ever made history are people with the weaknesses that you and I have, then surely it is our obligation to make history. And then when Buzz and I parted, something hit me. You're talking to Buzz Aldrin about how to make it into the history books when in fact Buzz Aldrin has been in the history books for 40 years? What kind of fucking idiot are you? And I spent the next 3 or 4 months kicking myself in the ass with humiliation for having given this lecture to Buzz Aldrin. And only after 4 or 5 months did something dawn on me. Buzz Aldrin was the spear tip of the most expensive enterprise humans had ever pulled off, putting people on the moon. And it made him the center of attention in the world for a brief period of time, and still gets him attention. But when Buzz came back from landing on the moon, he was like Alexander the Great on that mountaintop. There were no further worlds for him to conquer. And he went into a state of depression and alcoholism for 10 years, and his wife actually killed herself. So things were horrible during those 10 years. Buzz needed that lecture on how us weak, feeble people with depression and problems and zits are the forces of history. We are the great men of the next generation or two. And it's our obligation to know that and to try to do everything in our power to leave behind something that elevates, uplifts, empowers the people who come after us. So that's what I'm trying to do with the Howard Bloom Institute. And there's more, but because we have several projects. It turns out, Josh, inadvertently, without choosing to be like this, I have a tendency to write manifestos. I have a tendency to come in from the wilderness of my multiple curiosities with answers to things that I think are important enough to sum up in 700 words or so. And one of those manifestos is a manifesto for the future of life and the future of humanity, called Garden the Solar System, Green the Galaxy, which has been adopted as the official vision of the National Space Society. So we have a member of the Howard Bloom Institute in Scotland, an engineer named David Evans. And David and I have worked together on creating one or two animations by getting a college class in animation to commit to spending an entire semester making the animation for us. In the process, they get content for their animation and we get the animation. And I want to do that with Garden the Solar System, Green the Galaxy. Normally, we've done 5-minute animations. This would be 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And David is working on that. So that's one project. Another project is Omnology. Omnology is a discipline for the promiscuously curious, and it's based on another manifesto that I wrote in 2001, calling for those of us. Look, this is basically for you in your sophomore year of college. You're in your sophomore year of college. Your dad sits you down for a serious chat. He says, look, Josh, you're interested in art history. You're interested in neuroscience. You're interested in film. Make up your mind. Are you going to be an art historian? Or are you going to be a neuroscientist? Or are you going to be a filmmaker? Until you make up your mind, you're nobody. And Omnology is there so you can say, screw you, Dad. I'm interested in these three things, and these are the base of my passions, and I will pursue those three things simultaneously for as long as they remain sources of passion within me. And then if new things come up that trigger my passions, I will follow them too. And when I hit the age of 40 and all of my friends are having midlife crises and the women are planning elaborate divorces in order to find out who they are, and the men are buying little red sports cars and picking up blondes and cheating on their wives, all because they have no idea of why they are here on this planet, I will be coming in from the wilderness of my multiple curiosities with my first answers. And while my friends feel they're at the end of their lives, I will know I'm at the beginning of mine. So that's Omnology. Follow all of your curiosities so that you can see the big picture, that those who are tunneling deep into the earth and can only see the darkness around them and the mud, so that you can soar over the landscape of all these gopher holes of siloing, and you can see each gopher hole as a picture in a big as a pixel in a big picture, and you can bring back from that big picture of the landscape new questions for specialists to explore, because without the eagle, the gophers have no idea where to dig the next hole when it comes to the enterprise of science. And without the gophers digging the holes and checking out specialized tiny areas, the eagles can't put together a big picture either. Right. So your job, should you choose it, is the big picture and big picture thinking, combining multiple disciplines and pursuing them with rigor. That's Omnology. So we are lucky enough to have a person named Cheyenne G, who was an omnologist when she was 5 years old and had multiple curiosities and was hyper excitable about these things and had no name to justify, to validate what she was. So her real goal, we're starting Kepler Space University, has us creating a 4 to 6 week course on Omnology for them. That's our first toehold in academia. And there's interest from the Phi Beta Kappa chapter in the Twin Cities in adopting Omnology as a course to offer to their people, their Phi Beta Kappas. And that's an even bigger toehold in academia. So our task is to legitimate this discipline so that we can go from university level all the way down to fifth graders like Cheyenne or me, who need a word to justify their existence on this planet. And we have people like Harry Hamlin. Harry Hamlin is he's trying to become one of the core members of our group. He's one of the members of our advisory board. Our honorary advisory board includes a former governor, David Patterson of New York State, a former head of the House Science Committee, Robert Walker, the creator of 7 major BBC TV series, including Connections. That's James Burke, a MacArthur Genius Award winner. That's Richard Foreman, who's the god of avant-garde theater. The man who wrote the book on quantum cosmology, Martin Beaujevald. Scientists from all over the place. We have people from India, from Paris, from London, from Vienna, and from Barcelona, I think, in Spain. So the list of people who are on our honorary advisory board is impressive. Now, Harry Hamlin is the founder of a nuclear fusion company. Fusion is that elusive technology that can produce unlimited amounts of energy, but we've been chasing for 70 years and haven't been able to achieve. So Harry has a nuclear fusion company, TAE Technologies, which made the headlines last year for some breakthroughs. And he's also an actor. You've undoubtedly seen him somewhere because he was voted the sexiest man alive by People magazine in 1987. I know him best for his role in LA Law, where he was just terrific and a dominant personality. Other people know him best for his role as Perseus in Clash of the Titans. And Harry, how does Harry justify being the founder of a nuclear fusion company and being a Golden Globe winning actor? Those two just don't compute, right? Unless you have the concept of omnology. So my task with Harry is going to be to help him see the big picture that emerges when you put these two disciplines together and how they expand, each one expands the vision of the other, so that he can leave that to humans who come along after he's gone. We have people like, Jeff Bridges. Now, Jeff has been a fan of mine for 25 years. God knows why. And I haven't gotten to probe any of these things with Jeff Bridges yet. We shall see. But there are actors who are intellectuals and who are very curious about the world around them and who get the time to read. And two of them are Harry Hamlin and Jeff Bridges. Although Harry does more than read, he acts. He makes things happen in his real life. So it's exciting. I was astonished when one of the members of our group, Andrew Hacker, who's the founder of an artificial intelligence company called Thought AI, started reaching out to these people, and they all said yes. No matter how high their stature, they all said yes to being on our honorary advisory board, which absolutely flabbergasted me. So it means, yes, I may be having some success in accomplishing the goal of validating the lives of people who have felt like they had no validation. There's also another project called Saving Western Civilization. And I'm hoping to get that one up and running by late January. And people like Harry Hamlin and David Patterson, the former governor of New York State, want very much to be a part of that project. And it comes from all the thinking that went into my book, The Genius of the Beast, which means about 10 years of thinking. And then the thinking, Josh, it's a very peculiar thing when you write a book, because you are processing a whole bunch of material. And the processing doesn't stop when you finish writing the book and hand in the manuscript. It keeps going. And so I wasn't able to make the ultimate statement that I was aching for in The Genius of the Beast until a year to 2 years after I had turned in the manuscript. And what I came up with was another manifesto, Wives Save Western Civilization. And it goes like this. If you'd been born in 1850 in England, your life expectancy would have been 38.5 years. If you had been born in England in 2000, your life expectancy would have been 78.5 years. In other words, we've added an extra 40 years to the average human lifespan. The emperors of China were willing to spend all of their treasure to get an extra 4 years of life, and we've added an extra 40. That's fucking amazing. Now, any system of belief that claims a right to your idealism says it's going to lift the poor and the oppressed. But only one system has done it in a major, heavy-duty way, and that's not the Chinese system. It's not the Egyptian culture, which lasted 5,000 years. It's not the Islamic system, which still has an empire spread across the globe today. It's the Western system. And so in addition to that 40 extra years of life, if you took a Stanford Binet IQ test from 1916, the first year that the Stanford Binet test was used, and you gave it to an average 100 kids today, just plucked off the street, kids who we're told have been shallowed and dumbed down by the internet, those kids would measure an average IQ at marginal genius level, 135. In other words, in the last 110 years or 105 years, we have added 35 points to the average IQ. If you've been born in, if you've been the poorest paid worker in London in 2000, you would have earned what an entire tenement full of the poorest paid workers, Irish dock workers, earned in England in 1850. So, and the most important thing of all is this: if you've been born into an indigenous culture, one of those lovely cultures that lives at peace with its neighbors and in harmony with nature, or you had been born in the West in 1650, your odds of dying a violent death at the hands of a fellow human being would have been 10 times what they are today. In other words, somehow the Western system has increased the peace in the world since 1650 by 10 times. 10 times. So here's the bottom line. If our great-great-grandparents could give us another extra 40 years of life, then surely we owe an extra 40 years of life to our great-great-grandkids. If our great-great-grandparents could add 35 points to our IQ, surely we owe another 35 points to our great-grandkids. If our great-great-grandparents could increase the minimum wage by a factor of 7, surely we owe another factor of 7 to our great-great-grandkids. And most of all, if our great-great-grandparents could increase the peace in the world by a factor of 10, then surely we owe another factor of 10 increase in peace to our great-great-grandkids. And that is the obligation of those of us who live in Western civilization, to see these monumental things that we have somehow achieved, and to know that it's on us to do the monumental things to come. So that's saving Western civilization. And what am I talking about when I'm talking about Western civilization? Tolerance, pluralism, and freedom of speech. A balance between three major segments of Western civilization that are always competing against each other. And from that competition comes something larger. And those three elements are government, which builds things like roads and the internet, private industry, which gives us things like Facebook and Twitter and Zoom, and the protest industry, which has been around since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. At the same time that men were taking advantage of machines to mechanize labor, people were taking advantage of the printing press and increasingly cheap printing in the West to object initially to slavery. And frankly, the protest movement against slavery had its first success within 48 years of the movement's start. And then the protest industry gave us the anti-war movement. It gave us the anti-colonialism movement. It gave us the environmental movement. These are things that no other civilization has ever produced, these self-correcting mechanisms of the protest industry. In fact, in Xi Jinping's China, this kind of thing is not allowed to exist. No protest industry is allowed to exist. In Vladimir Putin's Russia, no protest industry is allowed to exist. And without a protest industry, you don't have the yeastiness of the Western system. Presumably, these other cultures will reach dead ends because they're trying to eliminate one of the three elements that are constantly struggling against each other to produce what we call the Western system. Again, government, private industry, the protest industry. So we need to fight for these things. We need to fight for freedom of speech, tolerance, and pluralism. And we need to fight for the right to have both a protest industry, a vigorous private industry. Elon Musk, what's her name? Elizabeth Warren just accused Elon Musk of freeloading. No, Elon Musk single-handedly is giving America a Mars program. And he's single-handedly making it possible for NASA to achieve its goals on the moon. He's paying for that himself. He's doing and he is working 17-hour days, 7 days a week to achieve this. If you compare Elizabeth Warren to Elon Musk, which one is the freeloader? Elizabeth Warren is the freeloader. She goes home and spends time with her family, and she gets to wander around saying whatever it is that she'd like with no consequences. For Elon, every decision has a consequence, and you can see it in whether a rocket ship takes off or explodes.
Right.
So
it's a very good point. And I mean, Elon's on a whole other level. I think he might be an alien. Might be.
Well, the first time I ever saw Elon Musk, something went off inside of me. I mean, Elon had never launched a damn thing. It was 2005. He hadn't even put a firecracker in a tin can and launched it, for God's sakes. And NASA was mocking him. And he took to the stage and he said, when I got out of college, I asked myself, what three things would change humanity the most in my lifetime? And my answer was the internet, alternative energy, and space. So I went into the internet and I helped build PayPal. And when I left, I got a $1 billion buyout. And then I skipped over number 2, alternative energy, and I went directly to space. As soon as I saw him say that, something inside of me went off, and I had 4 phone calls with Elon. But I could not tell him, Josh, why I was calling him, because I did not know. You have this intuitive intelligence, this gut level intelligence, and it can take you 20 or 30 years to figure out a truth, to figure out how to articulate a truth that your gut level knows. There was something my gut level knew about Elon, and it took me 10 years to figure out why I was bothering Elon with 4 phone calls. And it was because apparently I've got this superstar detective machinery in my gut somewhere. And it allowed me to turn Shaka Khan into a superstar. It allowed me to take Joan Jett and make her a superstar. It allowed me to take Prince and make him a superstar. And apparently that superstar alarm went off in my gut, but in a whole different way than with any of my artists, including Michael Jackson. What my gut said is, this is a man whose pattern kids will be following 110 years from now. And Elon has turned out to be exactly what my gut said he was, a mythic figure, a truly mythic figure.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So I believe, with the team that HBI has, the drive, like the current momentum it has going, I really think there's nothing but potential and more to make a super positive impact on the world and in the future. Maybe, there'll be a whole miniature like space station and it's Howard Bloom Institute in space. Like that would be pretty cool.
That would be fabulous. Well, I got to tell the audience, Josh has been incredibly valuable in this group. I mean, you talk to Josh about something at 8 o'clock at night, and by 8 o'clock the next morning, it's done. It's there. It's a reality. So Josh has been phenomenal.
Well, I like I said, I've been so happy to be a part of it. It's been a big blessing to me because I've learned so much. I've had great opportunities to talk to many of the people on the board even that we mentioned. So that's always pretty crazy. But More importantly, I'm just happy to be a part of something that's going to make the world a better place, because I fully do believe that, and I definitely think that's something. Hopefully, we can get out there and push out there more, because I know so many people. I know me growing up as a kid, I was super interested in science, but I never really looked at science as just what I was doing in those little labs, dissecting a frog or making chemicals change the liquid color, and just things like that. Like I wanted to explore life, what life was, why we exist, things like that, because it always just piqued my interest when I would just sit there. I was kind of a weird kid too. I would just sit there staring at ants working and doing their thing, and I'm like, they're just one in billions around the world, and yet when they work together, they make these incredible structures. They get by, and I feel like people could do that, but people are just a lot more complex than ants, unfortunately. So it's a bit more difficult, especially in today's climate, which you had mentioned, with government riot or protests and the other one,
Protest industry.
yeah, and so all three of those are kind of clouded right now amongst a lot of the population, unfortunately. So I think the birth of HBI happening now is like prime time, like the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Like we're gonna get through this. HBI is gonna help us. HBI is gonna guide us.
Well, that would be nice.
Not to sound like a cult now that I think about it.
Well, the whole goal is to benefit humanity. The whole goal is to uplift, upgrade, and empower humanity. And when you uplift, upgrade, and empower humanity, you just do something very strange for the cosmos. You produce things that this cosmos has never known before. So we've been diligently seeking extraterrestrial life since about 1975 or 1980, when Carl Sagan founded the SETI Foundation. And Sagan has managed to raise a substantial amount of money to keep looking for extraterrestrial or even extragalactic life. And so far, we've found nothing. Now, that could be our fault for not knowing how to interpret signals coming in from outer space, but it's unlikely, since we're using supercomputers and some of the smartest human beings on the planet. So far as we know, we are the cosmos' only experiment in life. And every new thing that we achieve is a first in the cosmos. If this is a cosmos sending out feelers to feel out her potential, we are those feelers in ways that the cosmos has never seen before, because it took 100 million years or so to generate a sun, possibly as much as 1 billion years to generate a sun or a star. But we are generating new things every 5 years. I mean, the iPhone, which has utterly changed the nature of human life, the iPhone and its imitators, has only been around since 2007. And God knows what the next big splash will be. One of them is going to be the Starship. That's Elon Musk's 100-passenger spaceship, which is going to utterly change the relationship between life and space. And here's how it looks in terms of guarding the solar system, reading the galaxy. Once upon a time, there was a poison pill of a planet, and it was the home of the climate catastrophe. Why? It swiveled around its axis every 6 hours. So if you've been at one point on this poison pill of a planet, you would have been swamped, flooded with this toxic stuff called radiation for 3 hours. Then you would have swiveled into an equally toxic circumstance, darkness. And the temperature would have gone down 88 degrees. And 3 hours later, it would have gone back up 88 degrees. Plus, the planet was tilted on its axis around its star, around the sun. And that meant that there were 4 distinct weather catastrophes every year. Today, we call them summer, fall, winter, and spring. Those are climate disasters. And yet, life learned how to ride these catastrophes. Life was a doom rider. Life came to life in spite of all of this, and sometimes by using the forces of these massive changes. So if life could take one poison pill of stone and garden and green the place, and we've barely begun greening Earth. I mean, you take a flight from New York to LA, and for an hour, you're going over greenery. And then for the next 4 hours, you're going over brownness where there is very little life. So life has just barely gotten started on this planet. But if we could green and garden one poison pill of stone, heck, there are billions of poison pills of stone over our head. And life has managed to achieve what it's achieved by being, let's call it imperialistic and colonialistic, supremely imperialistic and colonialistic, moving into any space it can possibly find in which to thrive, and then adapting and even utilizing the dangers of that space as power sources. So we are other creatures on Earth are as able as we are to do research and development. They're bacteria, and they're constantly doing research and development. And the result is that 12 miles beneath your feet and mine, bacteria right now are eating raw granite and turning it into food for life. They're turning it into biostuff. They're bringing it into the biosphere, from the realm of deadness into the realm of the living. And even viruses can outpace us. We've just seen that with the Omicron variant of the COVID virus. So what can we do that's unique? We are the only species on this planet capable of taking life, capable of taking ecosystems beyond the gravity well, beyond the atmosphere, into the space where getting to any poison pill of stone you want is fairly easy because you don't have to fight gravity anymore. That's our unique contribution to this grand scheme of life, which is inherently colonialistic and imperialistic, if that's the way you want to see it. But one way or the other, it's incredibly ambitious, and it's not patient with obstacles, life. In fact, it turns obstacles into opportunities. So that's one of our jobs. We have lots of them. I mean, we developed a whole new kind of space that didn't exist before in the 1990s called cyberspace. The internet had been around for 20 years, but with the invention of things like the browser, which we didn't have when I was first exiled into cyberspace in 1988, the browser and the invention of the World Wide Web and graphic pages instead of just dead space with typing, black space with typing, all of these things opened this vast world, even a vast universe of new space, cyberspace. And cyberspace is about us humans acting as antennae of the universe, seeking out every new potential. The things that existed in cyberspace in the 1990s seemed awesome, but they're primitive compared to what we've got in cyberspace today. And I don't know if you've ever seen one of these YouTube videos of an 18-month-old in a cradle with a cell phone. And it's obvious from the way that that kid is flicking back and forth that that kid knows the landscape of cyberspace in ways you and I will never know that landscape. And that kid has grown up with that vast landscape. And we created that landscape from nothing with the development of the internet in the late 1970s. So we don't just have as one of our obligations opening the real world of poison pills of stone, of planets and moons, and even putting giant colonies in the space in between planets and moons. But think of the next cyberspace. What could it possibly be? The next little thing that turns into a vast landscape, not just a landscape for us humans, but a landscape for the universe itself, because the universe itself until 1970 never had an internet. The universe itself until 1995 never had a World Wide Web. These are all breakthroughs for an ambitious and curious universe.
Yeah, and I love all the analogies you put together because really just kind of helps bring it to life and easily visualize it, and I like that. But so what do you believe would be the most important question to ask yourself, basically, in life now?
Well, I like your two questions. Why is there anything instead of nothing? Why are we here? And what is life? For all the 350 years of science that we've been doing since the establishment of Britain's Royal Society, which helped, give science heft. And despite all the science that we've done since Aristotle laid out his basic rules for science, which we've been following ever since, and that was 2,300 years ago, including that rule that if you break things down to their tiniest parts and understand the laws of the tiniest parts, you understand everything. Now we're capable of understanding that that isn't true, that Aristotle was wrong, that it was a very fruitful path he opened up, but it was wrong. We do not know what life is. We do not know what consciousness is. We do not know why we are here, except I'm telling you, we're here to act as fingertips, as antennae for a universe constantly feeling out her possibilities. But why is there a universe that's constantly feeling out her possibilities? How the hell did that happen? Well, you can go online and look up Howard Bloom, Big Bang, and you'll see my big bagel theory of the universe that explains the beginning, middle, and end of the universe and predicted dark energy 38 years in advance. So it's got a little bit of substantiation behind it. But then why does that exist? Why does the big bagel exist? These are important questions we really haven't begun to touch, despite all the science we've been doing for, if you count from Aristotle onward, 2,300 years. And if you count from the Royal Society onwards, roughly 350 years. These are still big questions ahead of us. And our real task is to pursue these questions, to pursue questions like this, questions that touch the ineffable, the untouchable, and to use our answers or even our curiosities to uplift, upgrade, and empower our fellow human beings.
And for anybody that's even remotely interested, I'll have all the links down in the description on the bottom. But Howard, I have one last question for you.
Okay.
For the listeners and viewers, what would you tell them that they could gain joining HPI and following along with the journey?
Well, the most basic thing that you can gain is a sense of being a part of a community that recognizes who you are and gives a justification to what you are. But if you became an activist in this community, you could do what Josh is doing. You could help take ideas that emerge at 7 o'clock at night and by 8 o'clock the next morning, make sure that they are realities. Some of them are very long-term goals like saving Western civilization, but you can be a part of the answer. You can also be a part of what rouses new questions. You can be a part of a community that brings you to life.
That's all very true. I can say I have gained just about all of those things. So there you go, folks. If you are interested, you can message me directly and we'll take it from there. But in the meantime, Howard, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure having you back on. And I very much look forward to all the projects coming to life and really expanding. And I guess I'll see you soon in the next meeting.
Well, I am truly privileged to have you in my life. It's a gift. And your 2.5-year-old daughters awe, wonder, and surprise. Hey, I'm all for it. That's what I'm all about.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, with that said, everyone, stay mindless, but not too mindless. Go get some education over at HPI. Thank you for listening to the Mindless Morning Show. We appreciate you picking us out of the many great podcasts out there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell to get notified whenever we release a new episode or bonus content. Now go enjoy the rest of your mindless day.